let's say the lead is scored at 30 or 40. And then on top of that, we add additional scoring from what the lead is doing live from maybe another source. Maybe we have found that a specific persona has written a blog on a very specific related topic that is meaningful for the company, right? And so we say, okay, because this person has done this, we're going to add another 20 points, okay? And so we do that calculation inside of Clay, and then we push that information inside of their CRM. Their CRM is the source of truth, right? Now, what's important is that it could be a CRM. A lot of companies now move away from CRM and start to use databases like Supabase to have basically a single source of truth where the data is constantly updated, okay?
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Growth and Convergence podcast. To bring you better conversation and expert speakers in the show, I have partnered with Stefan, who himself has great contacts, more than 20,000 LinkedIn followers, and he's posting great content on his LinkedIn. He's going to partner with me in this podcast. And today's guest, he's the one who was introduced to us. So welcome, Vincent. Welcome, Stefan. So Vincent, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stefan and Meg, for having me today on the call. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to speak about ABM as well. It's a very, very important topic and an exciting one, I think, for a lot of companies because we're going to touch on it, I'm sure. But the technology landscape has changed so much in the last couple of years that, what probably felt like just an enterprise play for a long time for companies is now very much accessible to even medium-sized, scale-up, small-sized businesses. So it's an exciting time. Just to tell you a few words about me, I come from a background in corporate. I used to lead sales development team and inside sales teams for the company like Oracle, PayPal, Tipco Software. So typically large enterprises and where I helped them build their go-to-market systems. And obviously, I was collaborating heavily between marketing and sales, specifically around topics like account-based marketing, not only around how to put it together in terms of strategy, but how to execute it so that it actually connects the dots. And then more recently, I've done some consulting for startups to help them with similar challenges. Um, up until the point I discovered Clay and AI and automation. And more recently, of course, we have now decided to focus on really helping companies implement these type of systems internally. So I think we're going to talk about it, but a couple of months ago, I ran a webinar specifically around account-based marketing and how Clay and AI automation can help solve the typical challenges faced by companies. And then I'm happy to drill down today even further with you guys to go through those typical problems and how we can solve them.
Absolutely. I know this is going to be a very interesting topic for Stefan, me, and you. We all are like ABM experts these days and working on ABM case studies. But in Stefan, for sure, enterprise ABM and Vincent, of course, you both. And I have started. I've run 3 ABM campaign in my own. I'll tell you, it was very interesting thing when I joined FitPy. They already had outbound agency, like outsourced, and great logic behind the outreach. Website traffic, like great list and great logic. But here is when I found out that the each company has a different structure internally. So what happened was some companies in the CMO who was running the A/B testing, and in some companies product manager or some companies the developers were running the A/B test. Message was even though we had a great logic behind the message, it was not consistent. And that's when I realized the normal list that we are building is not consistent. What do you think, Vincent? What does the good list and what is the bad list looks like in enterprise with ABM? What is your experience around this?
Yeah, absolutely, Meg. The list is the core, right, of any execution campaign, and even more so around ABM. And I think um, in the past and still now, I can definitely relate to that. Um, Companies typically do their list with the data they have internally. So they usually look at company size, industry, geography. Sometimes they add, for example, are they an existing client? Do we have renewals with them? You know, so they can try to prioritize with their sales ops teams which accounts they need to go after, right? But what they're missing, and obviously this was the problem up until now that we can easily solve, is that they used to create that list and then engage in the exact same way all those accounts. Now, what's important is to make sure that there is a mechanism around tiering the accounts. 2,000, 3,000 accounts, you're going to have a different approach depending on how hot or ready those accounts are. And in the past, it used to be very difficult to know which accounts was more ready than the other ones, right? And the reason why it's important to know if they are ready or not is because you're going to give them different type of content, right? So if they're more ready, you're going to spend more money on advertisement. You're going to spend more time on crafting something that is dedicated to them. And if they are more top of the funnel, it's going to be more awareness content, for example, right? Um, Now, the big game changer that we have since the last couple of years with tools like Clay and AI is not to treat a list just based on internal information, but is to actually look at different level of signals or level of data, right? So what I mean by this is that every company should look at their account target list in their own ways, but with what is their core signals that they're looking to get. Okay. So I'll give you a very simple example. So for example, one of our clients was in the public sector, right? And they needed to know when, because in the public sector, a lot of information is available online. Typically, there is a lot of lists available. They are able to know when RFPs are being made public. But this type of work used to be very manual for account executives to go into those lists, try to find the information, right? Where now you can actually use it to, with AI, to go find those lists of RFPs. You can even know and check in the past which client has won the deal, right? And then you can incorporate that data inside of your tiering of accounts. Okay, so you know maybe that some companies have already purchased a product and so on. So we've helped that client preparing their account list based on that public information that was available to them, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I actually have viewed your webinar on Clay with 3 or 4 other experts, right?
Yes.
And I had a lot of learnings, but one thing that I took from it is the 3 top challenges that you listed there. And
Mhm.
if we would do a quick recap, for the audience of this podcast, what were they? Which one kills, in your opinion, again, the most ABM programs before they even start preparing for them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So the 3 challenges that we covered during that webinar, and again, ABM is so large that there is a lot of different nuances and different aspects that we could have touched on, right? But the 3 main ones that we wanted to discuss were about reproducing the let's say we were about to reproduce basically the sequence of action that needs to happen to create and execute an account-based marketing. So the first challenge that we addressed was about gathering deep and relevant account insights. And this relates exactly to what I was explaining, which is not about making your list just based on internal information, but using AI to go a lot deeper, or using data providers to go a lot deeper in gathering the right information to make sure that your list at the beginning is as at the best it can be, right? Then the second challenge that we touched on during that webinar was about turning the insights into persona specific value proposition, right? Why? Because typically for large enterprises or for large companies, it might be the case for smaller ones as well, but it's less complex. So for more complex organizations which have multiple products, multiple verticals, multiple personas, right? The messaging has to be relevant to them if you want to increase your reply rate. Okay. It cannot be a blanket statement that you send across all industries, across everyone, or else that's the reason why your response rate flops. So the second challenge that we talk about was how can we make sure that we find the right insights for those people so that the messaging that we send to those people is personalized and relevant to them. Okay. And then the third challenge was about doing that with a multi-channel orchestration, right? And hyper personalization. What does that mean is that when you engage an account, depending on its size again, right? You can have maybe sometimes 100 personas that could actually fit the value proposition and the product that you're trying to position, right? And also, why multi-channel? Because a lot of companies purely use emails, but if you want to increase your chances of speaking to someone, you got to make sure you engage them where they are. So some people prefer emails. Some people engage very well on LinkedIn nowadays. Some people or some companies engage on Instagram because that's where their target persona lives, right? And of course, you want to make sure you also have the phone, right? Even though we hear a lot of people, and I used to be there when I used to lead SDR teams. Some people are more comfortable in calling than others, but the calling element is also a very key part of actually connecting to the end, to the prospect, right? And actually, you find out that if they have seen your ads or if they have seen your landing page that was personalized, it's not really a cold call anymore. It's a warm call because you're calling to the back of something that you have already done with them. Okay.
Absolutely.
So that was the three challenges. And to answer your question, Stefan, really the biggest problem comes back to the first question Meg asked is the account selection, right? Because, we worked for a client recently and, it might be surprising to you, but, part of the work that we've done with them was helping them, um, make sure that they learn about their ICP and that they have the right data inside of their CRM. Okay. Because interestingly enough, a lot of companies think that they know who they need to target, but
Yeah.
they rarely do the exercise of actually learning from the previous customers that they have won to really identify and understand is the target I think is the target I think or my persona I think it is really what it is, meaning how is it the type of customers that we're actually signing up, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes there is discrepancies there. So for one of the clients that we have worked with recently, we did that exercise. We reanalyzed all their won deals, and then we were able to extract the information, understand the personas that had interacted with them, and there was
Mhm.
discrepancies between who they think they should actually engage to. And so when we readjusted that, suddenly their response rate was much better. Their messaging was much better because we actually used what worked in the past. We were able to close that loop, right?
Okay.
Absolutely. This reminded me of my past experience. So when I joined FigPi, people did not have a time to update the CRM. When you mentioned that backend data was not done very well, customer success manager, so he was managing the customers. He was also working with product development team and also internal team. He was guiding them how to optimize. He's actually a busy, and that's when I learned N10, where we actually used to analyze these call will update the CRM. So whatever the task, they will update the CRM, and they will also inform marketing team if there are opportunities to speak, opportunities to engage in some other ways. So this all information will reach out to marketing team as well, and of course me and our CEO. So the relevant information. The point here I would like to ask, I wanted to discuss is multi-scoring. How do you score accounts? Do you have some examples for that, case studies around this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's a good question. I think what's very important again is, especially now that we have the tools to do that, the scoring is going to be about making it really custom and specific for the company itself, right? So I could give you a high level explanation on the scoring. So for example, it's actually an interesting story. One of the clients we work for right now, uh, we're helping them implement Clay across their entire revenue engine, going from marketing, sales development, RevOps. So there's multiple project and use cases. And the marketing team is quite new in terms of the scoring mechanism that they're using. They currently use Product, which is an equivalent of Marketo for the ones who know. And Product and Marketo are old scoring tools, right? And
Yeah.
they're quite rigid in terms of how they work. So with using Clay, we're able to put them on steroid, if you like. And the way we do this is, to answer your question, Meg, is it's based on the signal that are important for those companies. Because you can do a basic scoring that would say, okay, we want to look at if people have downloaded a white paper and we're going to give them 20 points. And then we're going to look at if people have watched a webinar and we're going to give them 15 points. And then we're going to look at if people have done a trial and we're going to give them 50 points. And then when those people reach, let's say, a total of 90 points, we consider that they are marketing qualified leads and we give them to the sales development teams. Okay. This is the old way. It's very slow. And the thing is, typically when the sales development team receives that lead, they receive the lead as, hey, it reached the scoring number and you got to work it. But they don't really have the background of what have they done to actually be there. Okay. So now the signal that you can do is adding the nearly real-time layer that is important for that specific company. So I'll give you an example with one of the clients where we're developing account-based marketing for them. What's important to them is to track RSS feeds, right? Because in their use cases, they want to know the new companies that are coming and being created in their region. They're based in Dubai. They look after all the new companies that are being created in the region, and there is a lot of activities. But in order for them to be fast and relevant on engaging the companies at the right time, we have built an AI agent that basically is connected to the RSS feed, brings in all the information across multiple feeds, and then gives them additional prioritization on their scoring as soon as the news is coming up. Okay. So when you have the ability to do something like this, suddenly you're much faster in engaging, but you're also much more relevant in engaging the right people. Does that make sense? So rather than being a passive scoring, it becomes a proactive scoring and therefore a proactive engagement.
Absolutely.
I'm actually curious about how you actually score the tiered list. How do you score the priorities in terms of accounts? I recently gave a speech in Vienna at a LinkedIn local event around intent data and signals. And there was a part there where basically people segment accounts mostly like in terms of like serviceable target market, serviceable market, and then the top one tier, let's say, accounts, right, which you're focusing on like right now. And then in many cases, sales misleads, but by giving like fake intent. For example, you go to a conference, and maybe you have a friend from a company, and they come here, and then you scan a badge. They come to your stand, you scan a badge, and then you add it as your CRM, and you put that as, oh well, they're interested in buying, right? And that's a fake signal right there. And yeah, thinking about your example, Vincent, you mentioned that there is, if you're using Marketo or any kind of like an old scoring engine, and you have something new on top of it, but then whenever you bring this like new information from RSS feeds, from other, like, let's say, first party data, third party data, you have to be very granular in terms of like how you how much priority are you giving to that data, and how much are you going to clean the CRM. Because it's very important that you are focusing on the right accounts, but you gotta have the correct intel. Because again, look, it's not the first time that I'm seeing 300 accounts at the beginning of the year, with sales being, oh, I know this one, I don't know, like this. There's an MQL from here, and then usually it's like you close them like around 2%, 1.5%, and then you start going through all these accounts, and you say, oh, but this is not a signal, this is not a signal, this is not a signal. This is a friend of yours, so why is he in the CRM? Um, yeah, so this kind of get some kind of funny situations again. And I want to hear more about your method, which is, once you have a scored tiered list, so like you have tiers like tier 1 to 3, define them as you want them: serviceable, targetable, action list. How does each tier get treated again in your workflow? What kind of triggers are you using to move between these, let's call them segments or tiers?
Yeah, it's a good question, Stefan. But I think there is multiple layers in your question that are very important for our audience to understand. The first one is, and again, we come back to the same thing because it's the main key principle. The first one is the data foundation, right? And you mentioned that. Why? And I was about to talk about this example earlier on, and then I drifted into another point, so I'm going to explain it now. One of the clients we work for had 50,000 records of accounts in their CRM. Okay. And this was the example I gave when we helped them to understand who they were selling to, because they believed they were selling to a certain persona. And we suggested them, you should go back into your win deals to really identify, are you selling to the right people? Who are your target market and why? Okay. And when we did that, it actually shifted their perception of not just their perception, but their understanding of who actually they were selling to. So from that little piece of exercise, we help them redefine their ICP. We help them redefine their core and primary industries, right? Because they realized that one or two industries had a much bigger propensity to sell and to buy than others, right? And this helped redefining who they wanted to go after in terms of account prioritization and therefore account tiering. So that was the first thing. But by doing this exercise, what did we realize as well? We helped them find out that 30,000 accounts out of the 50,000 were actually the wrong ICP. Can you imagine? So why was this? This happened over time because marketing by lists that they upload in the system, they get data from different sources. They get sales teams to upload and to create their accounts that they think are good accounts. They get even the sales development teams, right, to prospect and to go after certain accounts. And the big problem is over time, you accumulate wrong data. So what we did for them, we help them clean and we start again from data foundation. We show them the data and we're like, okay, those 30,000 accounts, you don't need them because this is not where you should focus on. And why is it important? Because up until that point, they were marketing to those accounts, meaning they were spending ads budget to those accounts, which were the wrong accounts. they were asking their sales development team to go after those accounts, which were the wrong accounts. And as soon as we changed that, so we removed those 30,000 accounts, we helped them to do a time analysis and upload new accounts that were aligned to the right persona with the right data, right? And only by changing this and enriching emails and phone numbers, within a space of 4 months, they doubled the number of meetings that they got without even layering account-based marketing on top of that. And then the next project was about, then now that you have the data foundation layer correct and clean, you can then go after the right accounts. So back to what I was explaining earlier on, which answers your question, Stefan, is we help them then prioritize based on different signals that matter to them, not just their internal signals, but signals from second party and third party data, right? What was important to them so that they could identify the hottest account or the account that were the most ready, which fall into bucket number 1. And then the account that were kind of middle ready fall into account number 2. And then the ones that were more kind of interesting accounts, but not much activity, but that we should still market to, right? As top of the funnel. And then once you have those 3 buckets, the level of activity and action is different. So for example, for the top 1, then this is where you spend your most amount of budget in terms of advertisement, in terms of maybe webinars, in terms of multi-channel engagement, right? And how do they move in between, to answer your question, is that you can then track the signals that are, again, very important for example, the product, or very important for, what they're trying to position. Okay, so back to the example of my client with the RSS feed earlier on, we could have, for example, an account that sits even on the tier 3 bucket or tier 2 bucket that is part of the target account list. And suddenly the AI picks up on an announcement that in the RSS feed that they're going to open a new subsidiary in this specific region. So what we do, AI picks it up, it brings the information in Clay increases the scoring, and then suddenly the scoring moves the account from the tier 2 bucket into the tier 1 bucket. And once it moves into the tier 1 bucket, we associate new type of activities, right? Like hyper-personalized landing pages and those kind of things. Does that help answer the question?
Absolutely.
It does. I mean, I would dig into the details just of this whole question for an hour, but you don't have
there's
that
a lot
much.
of details we could drill into for sure.
Yeah, because you have different. Ideally, you have different aspects here. You have different scenarios, how you enrich in what cases.
I think what's really important for listeners is that, and I'm seeing that a lot on LinkedIn, is that everybody is looking for a template. Everybody is looking for, hey, can you give me the magic sauce that's going to suddenly make my results much better? And the thing to understand is that the principles of doing it is the same, but everything has to be very specific to the company itself. Every company is different. Now, of course, within the same industry, you're going to have competitors that present their product the same way, but then you got to think about how can I differentiate myself from my competitor, right? In terms of value proposition. And therefore, what are the signals that are important to me compared to them? And this is where the granularity matters and makes a big difference. So to answer your question around moving from one bucket to another, we would need to speak about very specific example to be able to say, okay, this is how it would work in that specific case.
Absolutely. Okay. I like this when you said that specific. So I have 2 questions for you. So in FigPi marketing team, they had a 10,000 account in their bucket where they were doing the marketing ads. They were doing the webinars for them, and we had no conversions out of that, or not even enough people joining to this webinar. On the same side, sales team is doing their own activity with a different list. Of course, we wanted to do the scoring. So we pulled all the account into Clay, and we did the scoring there. From there, we decided, okay, we are going to so we wanted to focus on most important account, and that's why we decided we needed a first party data as well aspect. So on the top of funnel, And of course, we were also using different tools. So in the third part of our workshop, we were actually giving them to use our tool and do the practice on that. So we understand where the accounts are at the buying journey, what they are doing, what are their loopholes are, and then whether to send them a marketing content, whether to add them into email specific email list, whether to add them into small group coaching session. And at FigPi, we also had FigPi is a tool, but they also had an agency which is a service, and then a few, of course, few clients for the tool users. But that was a case. The idea point here is we were doing the scoring there, and the question to you, what I want to ask Vincent is, where would you recommend scoring, in Clay or in CRM? Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Account scoring. So, what's
I,
the experience?
yeah, I think, I mean, we're working with a client, with two clients right now who we help them with their scoring mechanism. The one I relate to earlier on, that is using product, which is an equivalent of Marketo. They were currently scoring most of their leads inside of product. And then what we do is, because of the additional signals that we can collect from various data sources, which we bring in inside of Clay and score inside of Clay, we can then add those two information. So the way it works is, you want to think about Clay as an orchestration layer, right? So we've connected Clay to product. Product sends us the information of the current scoring inside of product. Okay. Let's say the lead is scored at 30 or 40. And then on top of that, we add additional scoring from what the lead is doing live, from maybe another source. Maybe we have found that a specific persona has written a blog on a very specific related topic that is meaningful for the company, right? And so we say, okay, because this person has done this, we're going to add another 20 points, okay? And so we do that calculation inside of Clay, and then we push that information inside of their CRM. Their CRM is the source of truth, right? Now, what's important is that it could be a CRM. A lot of companies now move away from CRM and start to use databases like Supabase to have basically a single source of truth where the data is constantly updated, okay? Because the big challenges of CRM is that, as I mentioned earlier on, for the example of the 30,000 accounts that were not ICP, is that a lot of the time CRM becomes static data. And when it becomes a static data, over time, it becomes dead data. Why? Because company changes, because company are being purchased by others, because company change names. And this is just at company level. Personas are the same. Over our career, we all change roles, we change job, we move into something else, right? And all that data needs to be updated in the system, or else after a certain number of time, the data isn't the data anymore. It's not usable anymore, right? So the advantage of Clay now, a big part of what we do, and again, that's why I talked earlier on about data being the foundational element, right? Is because we help companies build their data model. What does that mean? It means that we review with them what are the fields that are important to them, both at account level, lead level, and contact level, right? That needs to stay and be updated all the time. And as we progress with campaigns, as we progress with engagement, as we progress with enrichment, Clay is there to make sure that all those important fields are always being updated and kept up to date in the CRM, right? So in that way, when marketing want to run a new campaign, they don't worry about having 70% of their data that is incorrect, or when sales development want to run an outbound campaign as well, they rely on up-to-date data and up-to-date signal. And this makes a huge difference in performance simply because the data is correct. So you want to think about it as my data inside of my company, wherever it sits in the CRM or in a database, has to be as up-to-date as possible, because that's the foundation of my castle. That's the foundation of my company. If the data is not correct, there's no point to spend money on advertisement. There's no point to do account-based marketing, because ultimately you're doing it to the wrong people at the wrong time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Stefan, would you take the next question about the personalization, like
Yeah.
landing?
I will. I just have. I
You
wanna.
can
I
add
wanna
your
test.
please, of course.
Yeah, I wanna test a thought, like a hypothesis with Vincent here. So what people potentially want is not a CRM. And that's what I think. That's where Atio comes with this kind of flexible positioning. You know, Atio CRM, right? Maybe Atio AI, where you kind of have you have a super base, you have a database, and on top of that, you sort of add different functions to it, right? So you add the data cleaning function, you add the you connect it to your Marketo, HubSpot, Then you add, maybe you even add, like I know for one company I worked in pharma, they had enrichment through WhatsApp. So they were doing a lot of WhatsApps with their clients. And what they did is that they built a bot for WhatsApp, and then it was enriching the CRM through their actual database, not the CRM, through WhatsApp. So eventually, your CRM is not a CRM anymore, just a that database, and you have these different enrichment services, AI agents, you can say, based on depending on which function do you need it to do for you. Is my thinking what you had in mind, or you're seeing a different model?
So let me just add an important layer there.
Yeah.
A lot of companies, and this is where a lot of companies go wrong. A lot of companies connect their CRM or database, right? It doesn't matter. It's just if you have a data repository, if you like, they connect various different tool sources to their CRM. So, for example, you talked about WhatsApp. It could be, a data enrichment tool like Lucia or Cognism or ZoomInfo. It could be the marketing team that uploads their own lists after events, right? And
Yeah.
what happens is when this happens, a lot of the data comes from different sources and fill up the same fields. So it fills up the first names, it fills up the city, it fills up the phone numbers and all of that,
Mhm.
right? Up until that
Yeah.
point, that makes sense. And that's what we used to do all the time. But that's also the big core of the problem. Why? Because the data come from different sources, very often, 90% of the time, it doesn't have the same format. So the taxonomy of how the city is spelled, how it's written, I'm sure you've faced that as well, right? A country that is written in 5 different ways, even if it's the same country. Once it has a block letter, once it has a dot, once it has a comma, right? But what happens when you have this? This impacts your reporting abilities, and therefore it makes it super complex for sales operation or marketing operation to have clean reporting. And therefore, it also impacts account-based marketing. It also impacts campaigns because the data isn't cleaned properly. So what we do with Clay is before to push the data inside of the CRM, we create a master, if you like, data model, right? Where no matter where the data comes from, it always comes through that table. And therefore it helps, one, make sure that there is no duplicates. So it check for duplicates.
Yeah.
If there is a duplicate, it check for which one is up to date, right? Because we could have the same person already in the system, but maybe that person has changed roles. And then it checks as well every important field to make sure that whatever we push in the system is always written in the same way. And
Okay.
this is a key aspect of then performing with whatever you're going to do after that. It's part of your data foundation, having a good
Yeah.
data model with the data written the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We complètement. Yeah, it does. It does make sense. Thanks. It's funny you mentioned. It's very interesting you mentioned that, because I was just reading an article by Thomas Allegren, about the fact that ABM becomes a part of RevOps, and then the function you just mentioned, I guess it falls
Yeah.
under RevOps in a lot of companies. And in this case, ABM is also somewhere there because I think it's closest to the function.
So actually, it's a good point, Stefan. If you don't mind me just, bouncing off of that, is I predict that in the future, and I've seen that, by the way, we have one customer in US that is a large scale up that already functions this way. I predict that in the future, there's not going to be any marketing ops and sales ops anymore. It's just going to be one ops team. And actually, I could share with you after the recording a link to a very interesting podcast. I don't know if you heard of that story of the Repin, right? Repin, which is now a very,
I
very
know,
big.
I know. Yeah.
And the CMO of Repin, or at least at the time, they didn't have a CMO function. They didn't have a marketing function. The marketing function used to report to the CRO and to the revenue function. And why is that? Because, and this is the big shift now that we're seeing with Clay, is that, and Clay and other tools that are able to do the same thing. The point is about removing the different silos between the teams, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're able to remove the silos, and this is also a question that connects to what we're talking about around account selection. In the past, account-based marketing used to be the marketing team who asked the sales team, hey, what do you think are the priority account we should select and we should push our content and our advertisement towards? So the sales team used to select the accounts based on their knowledge, right? But they were missing a lot of signals that we're now able to layer in. And then marketing would review those accounts and be like, yes, no. Okay, we're going to select those ones and we go after those ones. But what it creates silos. Now those teams need to work together, right? And by having the right data model again, it helps connecting those dots together and making sure that those teams work in sync for a better execution, right? And so the story of Repin was very, very interesting because he just explained in that podcast that because he was reporting to the revenue function, right? They were working together around who to target, why those accounts should be targeted, and how they should target them. And that made a massive difference between having one team, marketing team working on their side, targeting accounts, and then the sales team targeting this different accounts.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. All right, let's go to the next point because then we'll never actually finish this. We can talk hours. Okay. The basically question is this. So where, but be honest, in that meme, with David Beckham when he opens the door and says, "Hey, be honest," to his wife, from the Netflix movie. Where does Clay personalization actually fall short? Like, what's the difference in terms of like your mentality? Like, how does a converting page look like, and how does a page look like that it's like custom, but it's not actually converting? That something looks nice, but it's not actually something that delivers conversions.
In terms of personalized landing pages, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. So it's personalized, but it doesn't have enough context. So how do you define that it's personalized, but it doesn't look like? So it's personalized, but it looks like it's personalized, but doesn't have enough context, and it's not relevant. So I think in this case, how do you understand if a page is actually has relevance and has enough context, and it's not just hello f name da 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 da. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this having data is extremely good point, Vincent. That is good. But in terms of scaling, how do you see? And I know that in the webinar you also mentioned that creating a personalized what worked and what did not work. Can you explain a little more about creating a hyper personalized landing page?
So, I mean, in the webinar that we ran a couple of months ago, the third challenge was about how can we make sure that once we have built the data, we have understand who we need to target, we have been able to extract the right level of information, how can we use that to create hyper-personalized engagement, right? And in the webinar, we went a little bit further because if you think about the tiering of accounts, right? And let's say the tier 1 account that you really want to look after, we decided to create hyper-personalized landing pages. Now, those can be just a one-off picture, clearly, right? They don't have to be very complicated. Or you can connect actually Clay to various tools like Webflow, or I discovered one very recently that we're going to start using, which is called Gen Page. It's also very, very good. It connects to Clay and it helps very easily create hyper-personalized landing pages. And why does that work? Again, it's not because of Clay. It's because, well, it's not because of Clay. Clay is the orchestration layer that helps connect the dots, okay? But it's not Clay that does the work. The work is then done in collecting the right signal and collecting the right information. What I mean by this is part of collecting those information come very easily because you connect it to other tools such as, again, it could be Zoom Info, it could be a data tool, it can be, a third-party tool where you have directly available information, right? But it also comes from good prompt engineering. Why? Because inside of Clay, you can also use AI agents. You can connect your LLMs like Perplexity or Claude or other things to ask very specific questions so that AI builds, well, first search for the data and builds, extract the information that you want in order for them to push that information into your landing page to make it personalized. I'll give you an example. One of the clients, what we have done for them is it was very important for their account executive team for the tier 1 accounts to search for the financial statement of the companies, the public companies. So they used to target very, very large enterprises, right? And as I'm sure you know, a lot of account executives need to be able to download or find those financial reports, which are typically 25, 30, 40 pages, and to find the information that they can use to personalize their engagement. So inside of Clay, we have built that process. So one of the AI agents had to go and find those documents that are publicly available on the web, right? At scale, therefore across all the accounts. Once it had found the PDF, it brought in the PDF inside of Clay. And then a second agent was scanning the PDF and looking for very specific keywords, right? So again, this is important for every company to remember that the personalization is down to what they need, right? Keywords for our company A is going to be different than keywords for company B, okay? And then the agent was extracting pieces of information directly from the financial report. And so what does that mean? Is that when we created a landing page, let's say targeting Stefan or targeting Meg, right? We were able to also extract your profile pictures from LinkedIn. We were able to extract some of your background information, okay? Or even a blog that you have written. And when we send the personalized landing page, we were able to put these pieces together inside a Webflow. Okay. So now it becomes very, very, very specific and very, very relevant to that person, not just because we have connected Clay and Webflow, but because of all the work that has been done to find the right information. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Stefan,
Now,
you
the only thing I wanted to add is Meg. Of course, Webflow is one tool. As I said, Gen Page is another one. There are other tools on the market as well, and it does and can, in some extent, require some obviously expertise in those tools to be able to connect the two together. But they connect with APIs. So as long as you're familiar with APIs and as long as you're familiar with the tool itself, it becomes quite simple to execute it.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you look at my experiences? There is a lot of BS, okay? When we talk about hyper personalization landing pages, when someone sends me an email, "Hi Stefan, I saw that you're hiring on LinkedIn," I I don't even need to think about it. I ignore it like right away, okay? Now, how do you sort of like how do you prioritize a page, and how do you understand that a page is good enough in terms of like relevance, context, and maybe personalization is not even that important. But what are the, let's say, the key points that make, let's say, make or break a landing page for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stefan. I think again, first of all, before we go live with something like this, because then it's going to be a system that runs pretty much autonomously, right? At scale. So it could be across 500, 1,000 accounts, 2,000 accounts. There is an element of testing, right? So there is a testing phase where once we build the orchestration of those tools, we test it end to end for a few accounts, right? And then we see the results that we have, and then we can adjust. Does that make sense? Is the copy good? Does that look good, right? Before we roll it out, for sure. It has to be, right? And of course, as the campaign runs as well, we monitor the performance in terms of, okay, now that it's going, are people checking that landing page? How long are they staying on it? Are they clicking on the call to action, right? So there is, of course, always an element of continuous improvement and iteration. That's for sure. But what I would say to answer your question is, the important aspect is to really understand, again, what is the message that you want to carry to your prospect, okay? And how much do you want to tell them? Because as I explained, the landing page could be just a one simple one pager, right? Or it could be a very long, 2-3 slides presentation, depending on what you want to do. So it's also about defining that piece, right? One example I can give you, which is a second webinar that we ran more recently with Morgan J. Ingram. I can't remember if I mentioned it to you guys. Morgan Ingram is one of the best sales social media trainer in US and focuses on social media. And what we have done with him is he's not really pro AI, especially for that reason, because a lot of companies just use AI to try to scale. They're talking about personalization, but all they change is the first name. And and the reason for that is because the prompt engineering that they're using isn't good enough to basically deliver a good level of personalization, right? LLM is not a magic recipe. Suddenly, I think a lot of people think about AI as the magic solution that's going to solve all the problems, but it's very much like data. If you put a very poor quality prompt, you're going to have a very poor quality output, right? And in this specific webinar, which I will be happy to share, you could even add it to our viewers in the section, so they can go and have a look at it. Since we talk about it, we went and showed how to do hyper personalization, right, of engagement that we could then use for landing page. In this case, we didn't. The idea was to say, we're going to use AI to do the heavy lifting for account executive on very complex accounts. Okay. And part of the prompt engineering was that AI was leveraging a 25 pages document inside of the prompt that simply touched on all the important aspects of the company. So inside of that document, we had the company services. How did they position their products better in certain industries than others? We had the persona definition. We had specific use cases for specific industries. And so why did we do that? We did that to feed AI with the exact information it needed to be able to understand the concept and understand how it should provide the information back to us in terms of personalization. Because if it didn't have that understanding, the output that we would get for AI would have been much less specific. Okay, so the very important point there in terms of making sure that your landing page is then working is also providing AI and the prompt with how do you connect the dots between the pain that you have identified or the pain that you believe the prospects that you're targeting is having. 2, your value proposition and how you're going to solve it.
Absolutely. So I understand this is AI important, using AI. What I wanted to ask you with this specific case study is, what is the ROI? What are the realistic results that a company should expect, and what the numbers looks like? Can you highlight on this point, Vincent?
Yeah, I mean, ROI, listen, ROI, of course, is a very important point, right? At the end of the day, we want to spend money and make sure that the money that is spent is creating revenue. In my point of view, there's no really point to speak about, big numbers. Everybody can flash big numbers and say, hey, we've created 30 million for this company. Okay, but what does that mean? Is it 30 million? Was it just one contract that was worth 30 million? Or was it 100,000 contracts that were worth, 500,000 or 500, right? So the number itself in terms of the revenue, in my opinion, is irrelevant because every company is different. Every company is different, is selling different type of services at different price points. What is important though, is to understand, is the message resonating to increase, for example, the reply rates, or to increase the number of interests and meetings that you're going to get, right? So to give you an example, with the landing pages that we've created, the time spent on the personas that we were sending it to has increased between 3 to 5 times. So we knew their level of interest into what we were sharing with them has suddenly increased because it was a lot more relevant. And then what does that mean? Obviously, as a result of that, there was more meetings that were booked. There was more conversations that those people were having, because we knew we had touched the right interest to those people. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vincent. Thank you. I'm sure our listeners are going to get great value out of this. And thank you so much, Vincent, for joining. And thank you so much, Stefan, for bringing a wonderful guest and being my partner and co-hosting this webinar.
No problem. My pleasure. I mean, just as a closing statement, I think for me, really, what I really got to understand even more than what I was doing before is the foundation of, and this is very important for all the listeners. I think right now, leaders, irrespective if they're in sales or in marketing, on daily basis, they have their target to achieve, right? They have their monthly target, they have their quarterly target, they have their yearly target. And too often, they're looking for quick solutions, quick results that are going to change what they do, right? And they miss a critical part of the process, is the data. Are you working with quality data? What are you missing in your data, right? Because this is where the real difference is going to be happening. So if you have a tool like Clay or similar that helps you clean your data, making sure that you target the right people at the right time, for sure the performance is going to increase. This is a guarantee. I can guarantee it, no problem. But it's got to be with the right data. If you try to build an ABM campaign just because you want an ABM campaign and you've never run it before,